Okay, and that's what the okra looks like. It's pretty, and apparently there's many different colors too, by the way. And really exciting, and it turns out, well, I did tell you, they bred it so it doesn't have the oxalic acid in it. And that's exciting to me. I'm much more interested in it because of that. I like the texture, I love how they look. They're fun to grow, but I worry about too much oxalic acid. Best to start them about 6 weeks before the last frost date. The tubers are the reproductive portion. Because they do not begin setting tubers until fall, you got to do the same kind of protection. The longer you protect them, the more you're going to get. And that's not hard to do. It's pretty easy, especially for something that small. Now, with the nasturtium family one, I like to grow those on concrete, basically a tomato tower, like a piece of concrete reinforcing wire. So to protect that and not have it touching, which would probably kill a lot of those leaves, what I'd probably do is put like 9-gauge wire over it in like a, like this is your circle. I'd have a piece of 9-gauge wire going this way, 9-gauge wire going that way, and have it stick out a little ways so the cover draped past it. So it was not really touching anywhere. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? Yeah. It wouldn't be hard to do though. It'd be pretty easy. That's so that you're protecting the nasturtium family tuber so it doesn't freeze until sometime in November. So it had that long period of time to turn those little tiny tubers into something big enough to be worth eating. Because they just started setting at equinox.
You said you start them 6 weeks before the last frost date, so it's a really long season.
It totally is.
Wow.
Yeah, it totally is. They got all the time in the world down there in Bolivia.
Okay.
But it's not a lot of work. I mean, you gotta put them in the ground. They take care of themselves. Nothing really eats them. Mulch them. You don't have to worry about weeding them, and then protect them to protect your crop at the end. But it is taking up space. Okay. But rotation, right? Sometime when you need a rotation, there sure isn't anything in the family that we grow that's in that family. It's its own family, so it's got that advantage. Or they're actually pretty too. You could do them as an ornamental in ornamental landscaping, but then people would have to look at your protection. But actually, one way you could protect those would be probably till pretty late in the season. It won't freeze until after dark. You can come out right at dusk and just put a bucket over them. And that'd be plenty of protection probably. So there's ways to do it. You gotta decide it's worth it, that's all. They're kind of fun. I do it, I haven't done it in a while, but I like doing it and I'll do it again. And each time I'll try and see if I can make it work better. I try to make sure I use it in potlucks and just have people, because it's like, people have no idea these things exist. It's kind of fun, it's a conversation piece, But I'd say it's fun, it's not my, it's not my resilience food. The guy from Cultivariable was making the point that if we just started breeding these things, you could probably, you have one that is a little later to set to set tubers than equinox, and you just select for that, they could possibly be bred to work here. All right, so Irish potato. You all know that it was the world changer, right? All kinds of things changed when the Irish potato happened, because people who before had to have more time to grow their own food, basically it got harder for people, because they could work even more for other people because they could grow their food in less time, because potatoes can keep you alive. Irish live basically fish, maybe a dairy cow, seaweed, and 10 pounds of potatoes per person a day. That's what they lived on.
10 pounds per day.
Well, and there's a reason why that was. Basically, if they grew anything like wheat that made money, the British would kick them off their land and give it to a Scotch. So in order to keep their land, they could only make it not be profitable and just grow potatoes. And that's why they starved when the famine happened, because all they had was potatoes. But it wasn't because they were stupid, it's because they were smart. They were not going to give their land up to the British. Because of that famine, the British passed laws that lifted their tariffs on agricultural products. And that meant that the poor people in the slums could eat no matter what. And as the author of Seeds of Change by Henry Hobhouse, who basically wrote the same kind of book that Michael Pollan wrote, Botany of Desire, as he says, that's when the upper class could really oppress them. Because the one thing that gets a revolution going is hunger. And if they're not hungry, they'll take a lot of crap. And Russia basically totally switched their food. It changed the world in a big way because there's so much food. When the Irish potato famine happened, It took out every potato and every tomato in Europe. Basically, it's because we were having cool nights and rainy days. The nights get below 60, it's rainy, and that's the kind of summer they had. There were no potatoes anywhere in Europe. It's just that the Irish, because of their oppression, were utterly dependent on them, and that's why they starved. Okay, so we talked a little earlier about Kennebecs and a few other potatoes that are disease resistant. And if you look in the books, the game ender, once the late blight comes, you don't have potatoes. Even if they're in the ground and ready, the odds are very good that the spores are going to wash down in and they're not going to keep. That's what happened to the Irish. They harvested lots of good potatoes, and then this horrible stink from rotting potatoes, which, as you know, is a horrible stink, happened everywhere. Because even though they came out of the ground good, they had the spores on them and they were gone. So that's the one disease, the one I really care about. Hollow heart. I had a friend, Ryan Wiebe, of Wiebe Farming, great name. And he's a really good farmer, and he figured he was going to go into potatoes for rotation. He got burned so bad because he always does a really good job and grows really big stuff. And he grew really nice big Kennebecs. He had huge potatoes, and they all had hollow heart. Kennebec basically is one that's prone to hollow heart because it tends to be big potatoes. The bigger ones are the ones that get it, or ones that have had a slow period of growth and a fast period of growth. So a whole lot of it has to do with how you take care of your plants. You want to be careful about how you feed potatoes. You don't want to give them a feed that causes them to grow a lot in a hurry. It has to be like real gradual feed. And you don't want to grow them at the standard foot apart, because that's going to get you big potatoes and you'll end up with hollow heart. Unless you really attach to big potatoes and then you take your chances. But I actually like smaller potatoes anyways. And so I grow my plants at 6 inches apart. Takes more seed, but I get the size I like more, and I get about the same production. Doesn't really affect production. Once again, it's kind of like growing, 2 rutabagas instead of 1. It just depends on what you want. But since hollow heart is a pretty, when a crop's been hit with it, a lot of the crop is hit with it. And when you first get them, you can kind of eat them, but then they start rotting that way in there, and then they're all shot. It's not, anybody ever have them? Those potatoes that you cut them open and they're hollow in the center? Yeah. Like I say here, it's kind of traditional. You get your potatoes in by St. Patty's Day. I never do, by the way. That's like way earlier than I ever get to it. It's just like, I have other things I'm doing, Sometimes I get them in by the end of the month. Oftentimes it's April. There was a year, I don't know if people remember, I think it was 2003, when we had killing frost in all of western North Carolina the third week of May. And I had some of the only potatoes in several counties because I had bought my bag right before they sold out and I didn't have them in yet. I was planting them the day the frost started. When potatoes are that big, they don't come back. They can get knocked back when they're small and they still have a lot of tuber to come from, but at that point they're totally dependent on their leaf coverage to give them production, and they all wiped out. So being tardy sometimes pays off. If you're planting them that early, it's okay, they'll make it. They can get frosted back and they'll keep coming, but you're taking from a reservoir of food that if the plant uses every bit of it, it's going to be stronger and bigger and healthier and make more potatoes. So if you can keep it from frosting, if you plant on St. Patty's Day, you're going to have better potatoes. Some people just come out, they're small, they just cover them with dirt. They don't frost, the potatoes grow through the dirt, and they're good. But if you're not going to do that, then you might think about row cover. Obviously, if you're doing large scale, you're not going to think about row cover. Potato beetles, how many people have problems with potato beetles? Not too many, good. The rest of you are doing some farmscaping, I'm betting. So that's your solution. Your solution is to get lots of plants blooming. To learn about plants that put out nectar even when they're not blooming like bachelor buttons, sweet potatoes, cowpeas. They have extra floral nectaries. So there's nectar all the time and pollen as much of the time as possible. And those insects, loads of those insects eat nectar and pollen as adults, but feed their young on other insects. And so that gets you the control. Because potato beetle infestations are so intense, everybody in the world, it's kind of like the aphids on the goldenrod. I once watched a bombardier beetle, which is totally a ground beetle, up on a leaf eating a potato beetle larva. It just doesn't do that, but there are just so many, it couldn't resist it, And you just get control. You don't really have, if I was doing a beneficial insect talk, I could show you numerous pictures of various insects attacking potato beetle larvae. And indeed, Richard and I became partners because I called him up and said, I'm controlling potato beetles with ladybugs. And he's like, oh God, these farmers. It's like, ladybug's not going to eat a potato beetle. And no, it doesn't. It eats their eggs and it eats their tiny little larvae. If you really have to deal with them, take the adults off, but let the larvae be there, because if you don't leave the food, the things that eat the food isn't going to come. Let it go. Let it be food. Take care of it. And then you get the beneficial insects. Basically, cover crops and a light compost application is plenty. You really don't want that big growth because that's the path to hollow heart. And I didn't mention it, but another disease that's pretty problematic and oftentimes it's minor and you just don't worry about it. A little bit of scab on a potato is not a big deal. But in a bad scab year, it gets inside, they're hard to clean, they're none too good. Usually that's because of drought. Scab loves dry weather, and it likes calcium. It likes not our high pH. The drier it is, the higher the pH is going to be because the rain is lowering that pH. And so just if you irrigate, you could probably not have scab. It's probably as simple as that. But I've had scab, and it was in dry years when I wasn't irrigating very much. I might have had it where I could get water there if I tried really hard, and I did a few times, enough to get a crop, but not enough to keep it from getting scab. I do like to feed them when they're in flower a little bit. I feel like it gets the yield up a little bit. It might be, a little bit of alfalfa meal with some mulch or a bunch of grass cut, or I might have compost tea and give them a light feed, but not too much. What I really want to do is be sure they always have water, and particularly important when they're in flower. That's critical, And everybody understands why we're hilling them, right? Yeah. So if you don't want to hill, which can take a lot of time, then you just have to mulch them really well. It'll give you the same impact, but it's very easy, as you probably know if you've ever tried that, to underestimate how much mulch you need, and you get a lot of green potatoes. And that's not any fun. So just make sure you do it really well if you're going to do it. Potatoes hardly ever get to have sex. But when they do, they have fruits. And those fruits are brand new potatoes. There's no other potato like it in the world. Mostly potatoes are all clones. They're the exact same thing all the time. So, and what it said there is, save those things and try growing them. You could be the next Luther Burbank. And if you can't be bothered, let me know. And so I did that. In 2011, we got a crop of fruit, about 5 or 6 fruit, off of Desiree, which is a European potato that's red on the outside, yellow on the inside. Really nice potato, really nice potato. And all we had back there besides that was sun-gold tomatoes and other tomatoes. But still, even if there was nothing but that potato there, it would still be different than the clone, right? Because even if they're two very similar things, there's still going to be genetic variation because of sex, which there isn't from cloning. So it still would have been interesting. But what happened that I had no idea was going to happen. I planted these, and my friend Bob Anderson, who's a plant breeder, didn't believe me. He said, you sure you didn't mix some tomato seeds in there? I said, Bob, potato seeds, have you ever seen them? They are way smaller than tomato seeds. You're not going to mix tomato seeds up with them. I mean, they're like at least 5 times smaller. And I planted 2 flats of potato seed. In each flat, I had about half tomatoes and half potatoes. I can't say that any of the tomatoes were all that exciting yet. But I'm thinking to play with them still. I saved the seed, They were all kind of sun-gold looking, but didn't have a whole lot of sun-gold flavor. And some of them were pronounced mealiness, which I have no idea. That maybe that's what's in tomatoes and it was bred away from, But the potatoes, all over the map. Darker red, lighter red, tan, yellow inside, white inside, just total variation. And so I found them in 2011, lost them, planted them last year, and this year I planted them out. And they're still tiny. I mean, I'm barely getting them up to size, but I have some now that are about this size. And if anybody's into experimenting and wants to grow something that nobody's ever grown before, I could give you 1 or 2. I've got a few. And you could see what they do. I'm sure Luther Burbank grew hundreds, if not thousands, of ho-hum potatoes before he got the good one. But you never know. You might luck out. It's just kind of fun. It's a bit of an adventure. But it is how we get new potato strains. If we don't have sex, then we just keep having the same thing. So, okay. So have people planted them on bare soil, and then just mulched them over with straw? Anybody ever done that? It works pretty darn well, actually. If you got a lot of mulch, it's a really easy way to grow potatoes. they'll do fine, but you have to have enough mulch. And what's great is when you go to harvest, you just flip the straw back and there's all your potatoes. No digging, they're clean as can be, you know. You got to make sure that you're watering them just as much as always too though. You can't like do this and think, oh, I got all that mulch. They won't need as much water, but they do. Some people don't want to store them as well as they should store them because they've heard that getting them really cold makes them sweet. And who wants a sweet potato, a sweet Irish potato, right? But the simple thing to know is they get really sweet because the cold converted the starch to sugar. Take them out. You know, if you want to eat them on a Tuesday, take them out on Saturday. They'll be starchy again by Saturday. So you don't have to worry about that at all, if it matters. Frankly, I've never noticed them sweet enough that I cared. The colder I can keep them, the better they keep, and I don't notice the difference. But they do say they get sweeter that way, and I guess they do. I guess if I pay attention, I can kind of notice it, but it's not a big deal to me. Okay, sweet potatoes. Once again, this is the no-till thing. Totally productive. And literally all we did was we took that no-till seeder and used it to rip open a strip about this big in that wicked hard soil. Usually it would take us 2 or 3 days to get our 1,500 to 2,000 sweet potatoes into that hard ground and get the ground worked up enough to cover it again, and we did all that soil disturbance. Using that no-till seed drill just to rip the thing open, not to put seeds in, we got all the sweet potatoes in 4 hours. You know, just like, you know, I think there were 4 or 5 of us doing it, and they just like, the soil was easy to work, it was all properly prepared. We slid them in, there wasn't a big hole to fill up, and that's what they did. They did great. They totally rocked. This is this year's harvest right here. And it's not very big. It's kind of early yet, but we're going to be eating. That sweet potato you're seeing right there is in the pot you're going to have tonight. But I purposely took that picture because this is on a half of the sweet potato patch that got heavily impacted by deer. And I want to see how well those sweet potatoes do because, and now I'm drifting into the next thing I'm going to talk about in a few minutes, sweet potato leaves are a delicacy. The problem is, how many leaves can you eat without impacting the crop? Well, not as many as those deer ate, because that's a lousy yield right there, you know? So those got eaten back about 3 times, and you can't do that. You'll get a crop, but not much of one. And indeed, that's one of the better bunches. I had to dig a lot of plants to get 10 pounds of sweet potatoes. And that's because that side got hammered really bad. But I wanted to see what it was, so I got some idea. I think you could probably take like 15% every couple of weeks, and you wouldn't notice any difference at all. But you start getting to 25 or 30%, I think you'll see an impact. This was probably more like 60% 3 times, and major impact. But still did get a crop. I mean, there's still some stuff there, you know. We grow Beauregard types. They're not Beauregard. One's Diane, I'm trying to remember the other one, Covington. And the reason we do that is because they take the cool weather that we have here a little better. Plenty productive. We also grow some unusual heirlooms, which are fun, but the yield difference is really, you know, the heirlooms are not nearly as productive as these. Yana, my friend that grows sweet potatoes, she says, Beauregard, all the people around here call them going to market sweet potatoes. Because you don't mind growing great big old piles of sweet potatoes that are okay for market, but you want the best ones for yourself. Because that's all I could grow, these sweet potatoes, when properly cured, I think they're wonderful. I mean, they're rich flavored, they're sweet. It's like, oh, maybe there's these more interesting ones, but I love them. You know, I have no problem with this kind. And that's what works well here. We will always grow a few of the heirlooms, but the production is way off. And we're looking to grow a lot of food, so we'll probably stick with these. But the good news is, no matter what sweet potato you want to grow, propagation is really easy with sweet potatoes. Anybody ever done it?
Slips, you're saying you can easily self-propagate?
Easily, yeah. Basically, you can make your own slips, you know. Put them in a place with plenty of warmth and moisture, but not so they're going to waterlog. Some people put them like on sawdust. You know, I put them in the germination chamber, and I got one heirloom from this man, Nathan Kleiman, who's like one of those plant developers. I got it at the Sustainable Ag Conference in November. He gave me 4, but the other 3 were small, and they didn't make it till I was ready to plant. They ran out of life, you know. But this one was nice and fat. Put it in the germination chamber, and from that one plant, I got about 150 starts. Wow. Yeah. You know? But I was really on it. I mean, most people wouldn't push it that long. They'd get less and throw it away and move on, do a whole lot. But I was in there every day. I wasn't in any hurry. And I just would break them off, pot them up, and they, any sweet potato piece is going to grow. They root incredibly easy.
What's a germination?
Germination chamber is and we're going to have a class on how to do it next year, but we made a chamber that we can control the heat and the humidity. So it allows us to get seeds to germinate really quickly, and it helps us to get tomatoes that we have grafted. We actually cut the top off one tomato and put it on a rootstock of another one. They have to heal, and we have lights in there too, so that they heal really well, and we get much better take on so it's going to be a class on a germination transplant curing chamber. It's going to be a little bit more advanced. And the guy who designed it figured out that all these expensive gauges and stuff are very cheap if you buy them from the home brewing company. I mean, the home brewing industry. Because anytime there's a lot of people doing something, that stuff gets cheap. But if it's just for a few people, it's expensive. So we have all these.
Germination chamber, what's the other method of storing them?
Any place that's warm. Jeremy grew a bunch just by putting them in a jar of water on it, on his windowsills and stuff. But the warmer the better. But that time of year, they're wanting to grow. You're working with them. They're not opposed.
Saving them in the fall, they have to make it all through the winter.
Yeah, but if you cure your sweet potatoes right, that's not hard to do. That's pretty easy actually. Sweet potatoes usually will keep way into the spring. And indeed, a bunch of them might start sprouting. You're already on your way. I'd put them on top of my warm compost pile in what did I use? I think I used potting soil for that. Used old potting soil. I've put them just in a warm corner of the house. I've put them on top of the fridge if I'm just doing a couple. Any place that there's some warmth, and I don't mind them being there. And then what I do that a lot of people don't do is I then break them off and pot them up pretty small, and then they make more and more that way. So I get a lot. And by the way, you can also do this with dahlias. So you got a big fancy dahlia, like a big expensive fancy dahlia, you can go ahead and do the same thing, and as the sprouts come on, break them off and they'll make more sprouts. I tend to leave one big one so I still have a nice dahlia, but I take all the little ones off and I can propagate them that way.
Do you put it in the jar of, you're doing a chamber, but can you do the dahlia bulb in water like that too?
I haven't tried that. I don't know that part. You'd have to see. But you want to know how to make a quick little thing to warm something up? Buy a fish tank heater and put it in a bus tub, and put anything you want over that or float it in there. And now you've got this controlled temperature, nice and warm. I like the ones with the thermostats, not the preset ones, because then I can get different ones. But I tend to want to keep my house really cold to save energy. But when I have time, which hasn't been for 2 years, I like to make beer once in a while. And I make steam beer because lagers are much harder to make. So I have to have the temperature up in the high 60s at least, low 70s. I don't like to heat my house that much, especially if I'm not there. So I just made one of those things. That's how I figured it out. I just got a bigger pot, put the water in, stuck the fish thing in, 72 degrees all the time. A little bit of movable insulation over the top. I'm only using a little bit of electricity and not heating the whole house. So you can always do that. You can do that for seedlings too. There's not a problem. You can figure out a way to do it. Just let your mind go and be safe. Those things are great because they're designed to be in water. There's nothing unsafe about them. They use hardly any energy. They're designed to be able to walk away, go on vacation, and they're still there safe. They're pretty perfect. Okay, easy propagation, light feeders. If you overfeed them, lots of greens, go ahead and eat them because you're not getting a lot of potatoes. They don't need a whole lot of food. So if you're going to feed them at all, a little bit when they first start. But otherwise, I wouldn't ever feed sweet potatoes. If you have animals and it's time to harvest, for sure, let your animals have the greens. They're high protein. The potato is not much protein at all, but the leaf is high protein. So you put the two together and you have quite a meal. The white ones are less sweet, but they have that chestnut texture, and actually they're my favorites. Beauregard's easier to grow, but if I'm choosing a sweet potato, it just interests me much more. I love that kind of chestnutty texture. And the diversity of what's out there is incredible, of course. Just a lot of selecting's been done over the years, and Yana's got 100 and some. There's a lot of sweet potatoes out there. If you have light soil, either trap voles or get a Jack Russell, or be prepared for heartbreak, because they will completely tear it up. They chew on a lot of things, but sweet potatoes. Anybody else agree with me on that? Anybody else been hammered by voles? Yeah.
We've had deer get sweet.
Yeah, deer will come in and tear them up too. Yeah. There's a lot of nutrition in sweet potatoes, and everybody knows it. People know about curing them, right? So once again, the system I just described, that could be a great way to do for a small amount of sweet potatoes. You know, you could cure you could start, you know, let's say you have like 50 pounds, you could probably cure 10 pounds at a time in a bus tub. And if you had that, like, you know, some kind of container in the bus tub and then some kind of container over it, that'd give you all your humidity too. So you'd have your warmth and humidity and it would be very little money. That's just one way. If you think about it, we have so many ways to generate energy, heat in our life. Most of it's with electricity, but it's very little if you do it the way I'm talking, you know. So it's not a bad thing. The Jack Russell, as I described, if they are not busy chasing rabbits, the voles are gone. They don't do it all the time. They don't tear up the whole patch because the pest goes away because of the potential. For curing, about 95 to 105 is going to get you a faster cure. Someplace between 85 and 90 on humidity is going to work great. And it should take you just a few days if you're doing it that way. You know it's ready when they've started to cork over, when they pretty well are corked over. Any wounds have that kind of gray, hard, but not rotty, that dry place. And that's a big reason why you're curing them. The other reason is so that the carbohydrates turn to sugars and they're sweeter. That will happen eventually anyways if they don't get cold stressed, but it could take a lot longer. This way you get it to happen sooner. Yeah?
What kind of chamber do you use?
Well, I was just saying, we actually now have at the biochar place a room, because we do a lot. But I've used my car and then brought them in at night and then, you know, covered them with lots of stuff so they stayed, you know, they never got below 70 and they were up in the hundreds in the daytime, you know. But I assumed that I had the windows closed, there was enough humidity that way, but it probably wasn't. But they work pretty well, you know. I was saying you could use an aquarium heater and like a tub and then another tub in it and then a cover over it. And then you'd have the heat, the humidity from the water, because that's how the aquarium thing works. It'd probably be pretty close to exactly what I'm describing there. And if you get the aquarium heaters that cost a little more to have a settable thermostat, you could totally control it, you know. Yeah.
Were you saying, do you do it so they're one layer? Or you're saying you do it multi-layer?
Oh, in the room, we do them in boxes. I mean, we put them on tables sometimes, but they'll work in a box. It just takes a little longer. It doesn't take that much longer. The humidity's getting there, the heat's getting there. Basically, probably a half a day longer. The ones that go in a layer are going to be ready to go in a minute. The others are going to take about a half a day to get there. The only reason I do them on a table is to look for ones that need to be culled. You know, you want to go through them because some are not getting fixed. And like anything that's rotting, it's going to cause other stuff to rot. So that's the reason I would do it that way.
How do you know when it's time to harvest?
Oh, to harvest? Basically, I let them go until it's too cold to leave them in the ground anymore.
Maturity days.
They do, but they're still, I mean, as long as they're not getting cold stress, they're making more sweet potato. I want the maximum, you know? So, but the way I might not do that is if I had lots of other things I had to deal with if cold was coming. And then I might get them out so that I wasn't stressed on that day. But it's usually probably within a week of the time I expected to get, you know, you don't want the soil temperature to go below 50. If the soil temperature goes below 50, you're going to have some problems. You know, they're not going to keep quite as well. So, you know, that's how I judge it. This year, because of this deer thing, I might even put row cover over them. I'm going to push them. Yeah, yeah, because when I dug them, there were loads of thin, you know, things, and they'll make something by October when we got to take them out, but it won't be very much. It'll be like this, you know. So if I can get them to go to November, I have a sweet potato worth baking. So that's, you know, that's how I decide. It's just like, I mean, if you've had them in for 90 days with Beauregard, there are going to be plenty of ready ones. If you wait for 110 days, there'll be more, you know.
I had another question about curing. If we're curing them in the greenhouse, what ideas do you have for like moisture? Should we put a pool of water in there to have some moisture content in the greenhouse right now or something?
I get a moisture meter. It might be like, do you have a dirt floor?
Yeah.
Water the floor. You know, just water everything you can, and get a meter and see what you're getting. You know, but you could probably figure out. And then you could also, like, you know, have plants in there that are respiring, and watering them. You could probably get the humidity up. Greenhouse is not hard to get real cold. You know, unless it gets way cold, in which case that's not going to work anyways, because at nighttime they're going to be too cold. You know, if it gets so cold that, you know, when it gets really cold, then the air can't hold water and the humidity plunges, right? And that's why we humidify our houses in the winter. If you get that, like a brutal November while you're trying to cure them, then you got to just take them inside. It's a new ball game. Figure something else out. But normal years, you're probably fine. Your issue is going to be insulation at night so they don't get too cold in the 40s, because they really don't do well if they spend a lot of time below 50. And then the issue with that is you're protecting them to stay warm. Any rodents in your greenhouse are going to love that situation. Food and cover, you know. So you just got to think about all those factors. But probably just a few traps around it. You know, if you know you got mice, then you do mice traps. If you know you got something else, you have the appropriate trap. That'll probably take care of it. You know, but those are the issues I would think of for a greenhouse. I've done them in the greenhouse. You know, I've done exactly that, and just, you know, I had lots of row cover that I stored in there, and I just piled it on top. And I came in the morning, I checked, you know, I had a thermometer under there, and it was still in the 60s, and that's fine. It took longer to cure than if I had, you know, all 24 hours of high temperature, but it wasn't costing me any energy. I wasn't using the greenhouse at the time, so it didn't matter. You know, beets. I already told you the secret about the boron. That probably is the key piece. If you're having trouble, odds are very good that it's boron. Boraxo works fine.
Okay.
I don't know that it's certifiable, but it's nothing but mine product, you know. We actually went and bought, you know, some stuff that we could say was certifiable, and it might have been $15, but we'll have it for 15 years at least, you know. I mean, you're using two tablespoons or something to 2 gallons, you know. It's not much.
The same thing for human consumption.
Yeah. And everybody knows that they're fruits, not seeds, right? So you're always going to get a bunch. So if you overseed to be sure, you're going to be really overcrowded. So you just, you know, take a chance that it's 1. If your seed's not good, then maybe 2, but you might end up with 6 or 7 or 8 in 1 cell.
Do you apply the boron just once, or is it ongoing?
I test, you know. I do soil tests like when I get interested every few years. I don't really do soil tests all the time. My test is look at the plants. That's telling me all I need to know, really. I'm going to do one, and we'll see if we need it, and we'll do it wherever we need it. But we won't do it other than where we need it. You know, I don't want an excess of boron. That's for sure. It is toxic at higher levels. We actually do start all of our plants in cell packs. We just have learned that I already described how when it's cold out, those guys are just kind of struggling. And we'd like to get them out early sometimes because it's one of the things we can put out early. And they can take the cold. They just can't get a good start if they're a tiny little seedling. But if they're a decent-sized plant, the cold doesn't bother them at all. You know? So we just put them in basically 128s once again. As soon as they hit the bottom and filled it out, put them in the ground, and they just like way more consistent production than when we direct seed it. We're much happier with that. Likewise, this time of year, it's really hot. We can keep it cooler in the greenhouse, water them more easily, and then we just put them out when it cools off. We might actually do that thing where we dump it out and give them another half week if it's being hot right at a moment. Put them out when it's cooler, and they just do way better. So basically, about the only thing we direct seed, 2 things, peas and carrots, I think. Beans, too. Peas, beans, carrots, that's about what we direct seed. Once in a while, we might direct seed squash, but usually we like having a head start. And last year, actually, we had that no-till area that like we knew it was going to get out of control because our no-till plan was to knock it down and have it die, but there was vetch that wouldn't die, so we had to flail mow. And flail mow chops it up so small that it doesn't stay as a residue. And so I started plants to put them out because I knew they'd get ahead of the weeds. Rocco really wanted to do hills and do seeds because it's so much less work. And at the end of the season, he's like, Pat, totally, the plants are what worked. You know, and so you can do seeds, but if you think you're going to have, you know, not enough time to give them the special care they need with beets, like making sure they're watered enough, not losing track of them, maybe taking care of it, cutworms or something, you know, something that's hitting them when they're babies, like the celeriac all got eaten because they were with the. If we had put them in bigger pots and made them bigger, we'd probably have some celeriac right now. But, you know, so that's your decision. You decide what's your time for care in the field compared to time in the greenhouse. I could take care of a heck of a lot of plants in the greenhouse, not as many out in the field. So I tend to start a lot of things in the greenhouse and then move them out when they're much more likely to do well. And that's totally what we do with beets. And once again, 2 or 3 to a cell doesn't bother us. Yeah.
Just I'm transplanting my beets for the first time, so just any other tips about like knowing when they're ready? I mean, should I pull one out to see how developed the roots
That's one thing to do,
are?
yeah. If you can't pull it out, they're not ready. Water it really well. Something to know about anything you're transplanting, soak that flat. Totally soak it. That means there's not going to be any chance that you got called away and couldn't water them in. They'll still make it. And it works like oil. They slide out so much easier if they're sopping wet. So totally soak it. If they don't slide out well, don't even bother. Just let them stay in there. But if they come out and you look and it's barely holding together, then you got some time. You could plant. If you can get it out, you can plant. But if you got other things to do, you can wait. But if it's starting to circle on the bottom, either step them up, put them out, or do that kind of cheating thing I said where you put some soil in the bottom of the same cell and stick them back in. Don't let them go round. That's going to slow them down. It's not like you won't get a crop, but it won't be as good a crop. Try to keep, you want to always catch almost anything you grow, you don't want them to grow without interruption.
So if you have a cell that has, let's say, 3, or not more than 3, I guess.
I don't know, 4 might work sometimes. Just observation. I'm not going to make any rules. 5, 6, see how it works,
So
But
you
observation.
multiply the spacing by the
Yeah.
number of, and then
Yeah.
just plant them all in together.
Yeah, it'll work fine. It works fine with all kinds of things, though nobody here likes it.
How far
But
do
I-
you space beets?
How far?
Yeah.
Maybe I didn't say that in there. I tend to want them to be decent size. So how I always do it is I think, if the size I want them to be, what space do I need so they would barely not touch? And that's what I'm shooting for, So if I was growing a bigger beet, if it was fist size, then I'd do half a fist on each side, a little bit more than half a fist on each side, and that'd do it. We tend to pick our beets smaller than that, so it's a smaller spacing. Last year, somebody totally seeded them way thicker, and they were too thick. And we just didn't have enough time to thin them enough. We got a lousy crop. That's rare. Usually, it's very forgiving. You can thin them away, but these were just like overwhelming numbers, and didn't work as well. All right, this is really a key thing. Has anybody wondered when I was going to talk about weeds? I mean, row crops and weeds, those two don't go well together at all, My favorite thing is stale bedding. Does anybody know, or everybody know what that is? Okay, so that's what you do is you make your bed that you're going to plant in, and you let it go stale. You don't plant it, but you keep watering it. Now, why might I be doing that?
To get
Right?
the
To get the weeds to germinate. Yeah, you always want to water anything. Good point. If you don't water your soil, you're stressing the life. You work so hard to make it better, So anytime you don't water, that's crashing those beneficial micro populations. But big reason why we're doing it religiously right now is we're wanting to get lots of baby weeds up. And then you can come through not just with a flamer, you could also have a really sharp Elliott Coleman-like or some other kind of hoe that just does really shallow, totally shallow as possible. The deeper you go, the more new seeds you're bringing up. So you want to just cut all those babies off right at the surface. And this is about baby murder. You want to wipe out every baby weed with as little effort as possible. And basically, flamer does a perfect job. Just like walk by really fast, they're all dead. Not that simple. Walk back the other way because stones and various things there will help some to survive. They'll block that heat. Because you're never just stopping and cooking them. You cook the soil that way. You're walking as fast as you can, and you're heating those leaves up enough that the water boils inside the cells and it ruptures. And it worked because you'll see they didn't change color, they didn't turn black, but all of a sudden they're limp. And as soon as they're limp, they're dead. You got them. And so what's great about that is you haven't stirred the soil up at all. Only the seeds that are still at the surface can germinate. So you do it about 3 times, and I'd say all the time when we get this done, instead of 2 or 3 people weeding for a couple of hours on a 100 foot by 30 inch row, one person can do it in 10, 15 minutes because the great bulk of the weeds are gone, been taken out. And a slide that didn't make it, that I was trying to get in there, but I couldn't get it in, showed that, a carrot bed, just like, there's no weeds there. The carrots are this tall. And we did not weed that bed. The weeds are behind. They'll show up and we'll have to weed, but the carrots are going to be way ahead by then, and they're going to dominate. And the ideal is to plant the carrots that you're going to plant on Tuesday, on Monday, at one end of the bed. And then when they pop up, do one final flaming. So you know you've just flamed the day before your carrots come up. That flaming is critical as far as being sure you're moving really fast. Because if you go slow, those guys are real close to the surface and you can cook them. But you don't need to go to take a lot of time. You know, that rapid, and if you didn't get it the first time, you come back again, you'll get them. And you won't get the soil so hot. I mean, one time I did an article for a magazine that's not around anymore called Kitchen Gardener. And they wanted a video flaming. And I put rutabagas in because when I found out I didn't have a lot of time, I needed something to germinate in a hurry. The darn things germinated the night before we were going to film. She was there, but it was too dark to film. I just got some potting soil and covered up the germinated seeds. Came back and flamed. Didn't hurt them at all. They came right back through. You know, I mean, I only had that much potting soil on top of them. You know, it's like obviously not a strategy for a market grower, but for a home gardener, you could do that. You know, but yeah.
So I think I missed it. When you were talking about the carrots, basically you're saying you plant the carrot, you put some carrots out,
One day before you're going to plant the whole crop.
and then
When they germinate, you know to flame that day.
flame that day, and then that rest. Oh, that's brilliant.
Yeah. Other people talk about putting glass down, but then somebody says, I don't want glass in the garden. It's like, why bother to do something? Just plant a day ahead, you know? That'll do it for you, you know? It works just fine. But flaming is my favorite way, but you don't need to flame. High quality, sharp, precision cultivating tools and the Weed Weasel. Low quality, that's supposed to say. Very imprecise, but effective. So a Weed Weasel is this amazing tool. We got one down in the greenhouse I can show you. And they sell them at Lowe's and they advertise them. And they seem like a total ripoff because for some reason they insist on advertising them as not only working as a rotary hoe, which is what they are, but also being good for light level tillage. Total lie. They are useless for tillage. They're only designed to get into like that much soil. They're designed just to roll over and flick those newly germinated seeds out of the ground. What's great about it is it's got 3 little spiky wheels, and you could take any one of them out. So you could just run one down between a tight row. You could run 2 over a carrot row, or you could run 3 in a whole big space in between something. I mean, I've been able to weed like 500 feet, 15 minutes. You need the right conditions. It can't be real wet, because then it won't kill them. But if it's just like, you know, dry enough that it's got to where it's easy to weed, just fly through it. It's really fast, really easy. And then we've got no-till, so now I have all these tools I was collecting. But I'd say probably about 10 years ago, Joel from Earth Tools gave me a new hoe that I was interested in because I had just sent my whole class. I didn't send them, I just said that's where I bought my tools. And I collected cultivating tools. You know, like there's one that's round with sharpened edges, but high up. The edges are higher up, so you're cutting the weeds off above the ground, but you're not taking out the base of the carrot. You might knock a leaf off it too, but you're not hurting the whole carrot. So you can get right next to it. It's a brilliant little cultivating tool. You know, there's also like little tiny arrowhead things that'll fit in between. All these and you want them really sharp. You know, and you can just do these. You can do those kind of cultivatings really, really fast. I think it was probably 2000. Elliot Coleman came to speak, and I hooked him up with my farmer friend, Kenny Haynes, who does the big farmer equivalent. He does all the same things, but he just uses machines. And he describes the rotary hoe the way he does it. He sets it up the way he thinks it's going to work, and then he drives really fast, and he doesn't look back. Because the rotary hoe won't flick out the plants that are well established. It's only flicking the weak ones out. But of course, it gets a couple here and there, and if you're afraid to do it, you'll stop because you're taking 5% or 4% of your plants out. But if you do it, you've just eliminated 90% of your weed pressure, and you're going to do way better. And so you can do the same kind of thing on a small scale. And basically, everybody agreed that talk was the same thing said by 2 different people on massively different scales. But the same techniques apply whether you're a big-time machinery farmer or a small home farmer, just doing that cultivation. If you're doing cultivating, you make sure your rows are really straight and evenly spaced, because you don't want to have to think about, oh, I got to turn here, I got to do that. We're just not that good at staying that focused. Something will get on your mind or whatever. So set it up so you don't have to, And you could do that actually with make something. You make something that you just drag down the path, down the bed, so that it makes the same rows all the way down. And any variation, a gentle curve, you'll allow for that. You can do that and you won't even notice it. But it'll only be that. You'll have the same spacing everywhere, nice and straight. And that's what you want if you're doing that. Okay, stale bedding with plastic. It's not hot enough in the mountains to work. You're going to have some things that are going to keep growing. And you're not going to get the germination. Plants want light. Not all of them, but some do. I don't think it's a winner. You could try 2 layers of clear plastic, and that might work. But literally, we put black plastic over beds, and the weeds lived in them forever. They didn't die right away at all. And you don't want these plants growing bigger. You want to take them out when they're tiny. So I don't think it's. Maybe, like I said, if in a hot summer, the way they say you're supposed to do solarizing is 2 layers of clear plastic sealed with dirt, and that really builds up heat. But I've tried it in the mountains. Well, I was in Silo, which is definitely cooler than here. Didn't work at all. I didn't get, I had all kinds of plants that did not die doing that. But it depends on the year. Last year it would have worked. Last year, no question. It's going to become more and more viable an option, I'm afraid. I think we're headed there, But at the moment, not as good. So, allelopathic and that is the other thing. And that is basically cover crops like Sudex. I'm trying to think of other ones that might be that are allelopathic. Anyway, rye. They're plants that basically are putting out chemicals that inhibit the germination of other plants. And indeed, Sudex not only does that while it's growing, but its residue does it for a long time afterwards. And I've never had much problem with that, but I heard Ron Morris presenting here one time, and he said that Sudex was so bad that it could even kill seedlings. Usually it only inhibits the germination of seeds. And he said, not big healthy ones, but if you got weak seedlings, it'll kill them. And I totally forgot that, and we flamed. No, we didn't flame. We mowed a bed of Sudex with a flail mower, and then I wanted to see if I could cover it with straw and let it sit for 6 to 8 weeks, and if the Sudex would all rot and make a fine seed bed and I wouldn't have to till. And we did, and we got, nice seed bed. And we seeded it with the earthway seeder, and I was going out of town and I said to Rocco, I think it was Rocco, I said, do me a favor and flame that bed when there's a lot of weeds, because the beets and the carrots are slower germinators, they won't be up. And you can flame it at least one time, and there'll be some weeds to deal with. He said, Pat, there's no weeds. There's no weeds at all. I thought, great. Wasn't great at all. There were no weeds because nothing was germinating. Basically, we got no germination for a long time. Eventually, we got a decent stand of turnips, and I remember I said I sowed my turnips incredibly thick. It looked like I sowed one straight line. They were all over the place, but if you look from a distance, it looked like one straight line, 3 rows, but instead of a band. And I think carrots were a massive bust, and beets were just slightly better. And it was because of the allelopathic. So why am I recommending it then? Because the seeds won't work. It's not for seeds. But for strong seedlings, like those strong beets, oh yeah, totally work. And you won't have to worry about weeds at all, and you won't have to stale bed. Because by the time that effect is worn off, these guys will be banging. They'll be so big that they'll be shading it, and you'll have it covered. And then what I didn't put down there, but is what we do all the time now, we just mulch. We mulch pretty quickly. We get, the guy over here used to burn his leaves, and now he drives over and delivers them, and they're all mowed and stuff and nice. And his pile is huge. He's got a big yard. We get it from our neighbor right there. We get it from the property, other properties on here. I bring mine down. We have piles and piles of leaves, and we just mulch like crazy.
Is it a problem, oak leaves, high tannins?
No, that's not a problem at all. What will eventually be a problem? Maybe, but probably not, because we're growing lots of stuff that uses potassium. leaves are real high potassium. So I wonder if someplace down the road, we might have an imbalance, too much potassium. But I did it at Mountain Air, which is this high-end country club, where I got hundreds of yards of leaves. We would like have huge piles, and we'd have one day where we got a machine to haul them into the garden. We packed them into the path, and then came back and packed them again, and just piled. We got just because we wanted to use them all, but we couldn't look messy. There were so many leaves there, and then all year long we just take them out and throw them on the bed. I did that for 6 years. Did soil tests the last year, and the potassium was fine. So it's going to take a while for that to be a problem, And the soil was pretty wonderful, but it wasn't high mineral, of course, So that's it for weed control. Chinese artichokes, Grozny. I love that there's a tuber that's in the mint family. We got groundnut, which is in the bean family, and now we have Grozny, our Chinese artichoke, which is in the mint family. It's pretty mild flavored. They're not real big. They're not that memorable, but they're easy as all heck to grow. So the plant dies back every year, and since it's coming from a tuber, I don't know if that really makes it a perennial, but it's there all the time. You never have to do anything. Once you establish it, you got it. They work. They're fun to throw into things. They're fun to toss in a Chinese stir fry or something like that. Pretty easy to grow. And once it's established, it doesn't have much weed problem. While it's getting going, you got to take the weeds off, but then it takes pretty good care of itself. I mean, a pokeweed is going to get through it, but most things aren't. And the tubers are the reproductive part. It's kind of cute too. It's kind of like, a little curvy, and it's got those same kind of segmenting things, You just got to dig them up or feel around for them and pull them out, That's one of the reasons why I'm less than excited about them is it's a fair amount of work. They're not real big, and it takes a while to get them, So I use them as like, I don't have any going now, but when I've had them, they're kind of okay, we're going to do Chinese food. I guess I'll throw some of them in, That's what it is. It's definitely not a daily staple, but they're always there, That's unlike the things that would take effort to keep going because they're not day lane sensitive or anything. The hard times come. I'll be glad to have that patch. I'll probably expand it because it's no work food, and that's a good thing, even if I'm not excited about it now. Oh, I didn't mention horseradish. Everybody knows horseradish is easy to grow, but put it in some kind of container because it'll take over. And it is toxic to goats. But it's totally easy to grow. There's no work to it. Somebody said it gets bothered by harlequin bugs. I can't believe anything could stop a horseradish. Somebody plowed through our patch at one house I lived at, and a whole field became horseradish. It's one of those kinds of plants. Obviously, you don't need but one, so you can contain it really well. You can use the celery leaves. Of course, you can use the parsley from the parsley root. Jerusalem artichokes will use the stalks. Burdock, you could eat the young shoots when it first starts growing. You can also use the stems. It also has the beneficial insect thing, yacon. We have the tea for diabetics. Salsify, greens the next year, shoots, pretty flowers. Likewise for the score zonare, or whatever it is. Chicory and dandelion, you can eat the roots. You can eat the greens. You have to know how to cook them. You want to get them in the cold weather. And you can turn them into a coffee-like drink too. So lots of uses for those. Oh, and then dandelion wine, is a classic. I've had it once. It was pretty nice. Turnips eat both parts, right? Radishes can eat both parts. Horseradish, not both parts, I don't think. Rutabagas, both parts.
You can eat the leaves when they're young.
You can eat them?
Salad when they're young.
When they're young. Okay, there you go. It makes sense. They wouldn't be poisonous, that's for sure. Beets, of course, you can eat both parts. Sweet potatoes, you can eat both parts. Irish potatoes, you cannot eat both parts. You don't want those, Okra, you can eat the greens if you want. Mashua, you can eat the greens if you want. Uloko, you can eat the greens if you want. I don't know about groundnuts. I don't think you can. Chinese artichoke, I'm sure you can eat the greens. The mint family's not going to be poisonous. How good they are, I haven't tried them. Worried about carrot greens. People eat them. I once read that they were toxic. I haven't seen any of the people eating them die. How good they are for you, I don't know. In general, eating carrot family. Don't be casual about eating carrot family. Learn what water hemlock looks like and make sure you never eat it, because it'll be the last thing you do if you do.
One with hairy stems.
It's got red blotching on the stems, a little bit of grooving. And the leaves are fatter than a lot of them, but it's not that different than a lot of things. So you want to know it. Yeah, it looks like Queen Anne's lace, yeah, and it looks like some other things too. I looked up because I wanted to be sure that skirt was not at all like it, and it's not. It's got much fatter leaves. That also lends itself to growing in wet areas, so that could be dangerous, you know. But it's just something to think about. You want to be careful there. I think that might be it. I think we got it. Any questions? Yeah.
What beet varieties do you like?
Ace and Merlin. Do I like them? No, I love really tall top and Lutz greenleaf, but can't grow them. Too much Cercospora, you know. So we grow. So I guess the answer is those are the ones I like. The ones that grow are Ace and Merlin, you know. If we ever get rid of all the dock, maybe we can grow the other ones, you know. But not there yet anyway.
Tall top and green.
Early Wonder Tall Top, I love it, man. It's just a really wonderful beet. Grows really fast, great greens, really succulent beet. And then Lutz greenleaf, it's a big storage beet. I mean, it's a big, when I first grew that, I was selling food to the place I cooked at, Penland School. Everybody there thought I was a super farmer because I had these huge beets that still were tender. I kept saying it's genetics. I didn't do anything. You know, it's just genetics, that's all. But people wouldn't believe it. They're like, oh my God, look at the beets he grew, you know? It's like people go, oh my God, look at the size of that zucchini. It's like, that's a sign of not growing well, you know?
Where do you get rock nuts from?
If you want the fancy paramagnetic, me, because he had to go across the state to get it. But I talked to him today and I said that, yeah, we'll sell some. Then you can get it at any of the Vulcan quarries. It'll be granite, it'll be good stuff anyways. Yeah, yeah. You want the finest stuff right under where they're doing the chopping, you know, the grinding. You know, you don't want the bigger stuff. You want the finer the better. You know? And ideally not watered, not rained on, because that's going to wash away even the finer stuff, you know. So you want to go and during a dry period and get the stuff that's coming from right underneath it, you know. On the other hand, if you got to do, just go get whatever you can get, it's still going to be good, you know. If you don't have time and have to get whatever you can get whenever they have it, that's still fine. But if you're going for the best, you would do it the way I said. You can get the paramagnetic from me because I want people to be able to try it, yeah. 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 I can't guarantee we'll have it again, but we got a lot right now, and he said he'd replace it, so I'm just going to charge you a replacement cost, and that's it. Yeah.
We're thinking about trying that
Allelopathic is how it's properly said. Yeah.
If we want to try that, what kind of radius are we looking at in terms of like that area that's going to spread to prevent the germination?
Right where it is. Now, if something was going to germinate in the path even, it's not that strong, you know.
And what time frame?
That seemed to last for months, you know, probably about a month and a half, 2 months or something like that. It was pretty long. I was pretty amazed. But it was a huge crop, you know. And we flail mowed it and we covered it so it all rotted, but there was like that much residue when we did it, you know.
So I'm just kind of wondering, like, I don't know, one thing that's always so challenging is the border of the garden. Like, it's just this creeping edge of stuff that wants to come in.
Well, see, that's not going to stop these guys. Those guys will not be stopped by this. It's only going to inhibit germination or kill a really weak plant. The stuff that's creeping in, there's nothing weak about it. It's an absolute bully thug, you know? And that's not going to stop it. It'll go right through it. It'll look at it and laugh, you know? It'll say, thanks for the nutrients that were there despite that lousy seasoning, you know? So yeah, I mean, Bermuda grass, mugwort, Johnson grass, no. Smother them. Keep getting cardboard, smother a perimeter, keep moving out. If you find it's going in, smother it there. You can also do bare fallow, which is you work it up, and every time you see green in a dry time, you work it again, but that's really hard on the soil. For small scale, how big an area are you doing?
40 by 60.
You just start stockpiling your cardboard and lay it down.
And do like
You know?
4 or 5 layers.
Pardon?
To do lots and lots of layers. I did a layer of cardboard over Bermuda grass, and it's Bermuda grass again. After
Well, yeah, you got to have enough to cover it up. Yeah. If you don't deprive it of light, if there's a layer here and like one lays over that far, that's not enough.
It's layered over a lot, and it just.
Well, if it can get anywhere around it, it's going to go. But if you can deprive it of light completely for about 6 months, dead. Now, I did bare fallow on 3 acres, and I killed probably 95%, which worked great until a year where it was so wet that I couldn't get out there at all. Then I had 75% back in no time, you know. All those weeds are really tough, but for a small scale, I think you can also try smothering. You have to work the soil enough to establish the crop you're smothering with. And it wants to be a really fast grower like Sudex or buckwheat. In the winter, it'd probably be rye and vetch. And they'll smother it. People have smothered Johnson grass with vetch. It will smother it. The problem is it is a terrible pest too, you know. But the thing about smothering is the plant keeps trying to grow. So it's using up its resources and it's not competing. So it loses the race, you know. It's a very effective thing to do for nutgrass, nut sedge. You can wear out those nuts, so you can't get rid of them any other way. But you'll totally wear them out trying to compete with buckwheat or Sudex or something. Because they don't sit there like they do if you mulch them out. If you mulch them out, they just sit there and wait for the light to show up again and come back, you know, or push up through it. But this, they're trying to get ahead of those plants and they can't. So they keep drawing, they keep thinking they can do it and they draw from their nuts. And that's what you gotta do is wear those nuts out. And that's the same thing you can do with Johnson grass if you wanna do smothering. But you're not gonna establish any smother crop in Johnson grass. You have to one-time work it and then immediately sow it to smother crops. Keep it watered so it gets ahead of that. And then when that crop's finishing, sow your next crop into it and then mow your crop down, your old crop down on top of it. And that will work. You know? Yeah, but it's vigilance. I mean, you get your timing wrong and you lost the whole thing, you're back at zero. You know? Because basically when you're sleeping, it's growing. When you're on vacation, it's growing. When you're at work, it's growing. You know, it's like, its only job is to grow. You have a lot of other jobs. So it's a tough one. Any other questions?
What type of flame leader are you using?
I have a 10-gallon tank and a simple little, like probably the same kind of thing you use to melt ice off with. But the 10-gallon tank is a whole lot easier to carry. I did start out with a 25-gallon tank, and that was not a comfortable thing to do. So the 10-gallon, and I have it on a backpack. We actually have two. We have the one that I used on my farm and the one that we bought down here. And they work perfect. I mean, flaming is spectacularly successful. It is a way to guarantee a virtually weed-free bed for all those slow germinators. I wouldn't bother for fast germinators because they'll get ahead of the weeds anyways. You can come back and mulch them or hoe them out one time and they're taken care of. Lettuce or something like that, I don't bother the flame. But if I was going to direct seed onions, spinach, beets, carrots, those kind of slow things, boy, fennel, those kind of things, flaming totally does it. You know, it's not to say that you couldn't do just about as good a job being real skilled with a very sharp, shallow cultivator. I just don't pay good enough attention to do that. You know? I'd wander down there and start pulling up too many weed seeds or whatever. So, you know, or I'm not that dexterous too. I'd probably just miss trying not to.
Even though they're not technically roots, would you say that the types of things you've covered today would apply well to growing ginger and turmeric?
We grow them, and I thought about putting them in, but they really are rhizomes, so I figured I'd save them for another talk. Yeah, I mean, the thing about both of them is they don't like the heat, so you got to grow them in a place that's cool. You know, they want to stay below, the soil wants to stay below 90, or it's not going to do well. But otherwise, I think, yeah, I don't think they're heavy feeders. You know, you got to keep the weed pressure off them. Yeah.
Do they need a little light?
Actually, they can make it on the edge. I mean, once again, whenever you say something can make it, right? All those things that can do 5 hours, they're not going to produce as if they were in full sun. But if you're looking to get around the heat problem and use a space that you're not using, they'll do something. They're an edge plant, you know. They won't do it in 2 hours of sun a day. But if you got 6 or something, you'll get a crop. It won't be as good, but you'll get a crop. Okay.